Wagwan. Good morning, good night, welcome back. And if you're listening for the first time, I'm your host Melanie Byfield, welcoming you to another episode of The Real Situation, where we give you a taste of Jamaican politics. Happy Emancipation Day. I like to meditate on this holiday. It's huge. Around 188 years ago, my ancestors and yours in Jamaica and other islands in the West Indies were declared free. In a previous episode, I'd likened Jamaica's mission for self-determination to a relay. We are free because of the likes of Taki, Nanny of the Maroons, Paul Bogle and George William Gordon, who came out of the blocks fighting for freedom from slavery, sacrificing their lives before it was eventually secured in 1838. In 1840, Sam Sharp and others continued the race, sacrificing their lives, fighting against political, economic and racial injustices, as well as the criminalization of religious and civil freedoms, which black people bore the brunt of. The 20th century looked to leaders like Alexander Bedward, Reverend Dr. Robert Love, and the Right Excellent Marcus Garvey to keep up the pace and challenge the racial hierarchy, handing the baton off to William Grant, Alexander Bustamante, Norman Manley, and the hundreds of workers who carried out serious strikes and disturbances against economic conditions, drastically reduced wages, unemployment, underemployment, and health conditions during the 1838 Labour Rebellion. Norman Manley and Alexander Bustamante took us to independence in 1962, so who takes the baton next? Who is our hero that will run the next part of this race for Jamaica, land we love? Because the race isn't over. Jamaica's on the road to becoming a republic. Michael Manley fought for economic, political, and social justice. The fight for social justice still resonates with many through the music of the revolutionary king, Bob Marley. And there's Miss Lou, who worked with such excellence to preserve our culture. They're all resting with the ancestors, so now who? We are going to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery because whilst others might free the body, none but ourselves can free the mind. We know those words from Bob Marley's Redemption song, right? And as you probably know, they came from a speech made by the Right Excellent Marcus Garvey in Nova Scotia, Canada in 1937. I read a lot of articles, very interesting articles, that gave varying interpretations of those words, but what I would like to do is share a 2013 article with you from The Sun, a former national newspaper in Dominica. The title of the article is None But Ourselves Can Free the Mind. I'm not going to read the entire article, just most of it. We are going to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery because whilst others might free the body, none but ourselves can free the mind. Mind is your only ruler, sovereign. The man who is not able to develop and use his mind is bound to be the slave of the other man who uses his mind. In addition to those profound words, the great Jamaican Marcus Mosiah Garvey advocated that if black people are to emancipate themselves from mental slavery, they must establish a new sense of self and engage in a critical transformation of the mind. As we stated in an editorial 2 years ago, Rex Nettleford, the late Caribbean intellectual, said, Garvey challenged us to smash the old stereotype, to substitute self-esteem for self-contempt, to put self-confidence and self-reliance in the place of dependence and self-distrust. In other words, emancipate ourselves from mental slavery. But in 2013, more than 6 decades later, we hadn't realised Garvey's vision for black people. The fact that a great majority of us are still enslaved in one form or another must become the focus of the annual Emancipation Day, which we will observe in Dominica. That is necessary because over the years we've gradually watered down the impact of Emancipation Day until it's now become nearly meaningless. We believe that Emancipation Day should be an opportunity to evaluate, first, how far we've come since our forefathers were freed from the shackles of slavery about 179 years ago, and secondly, that this is the time for us to consider how far we have to travel as a people along the continuum from slavery to full freedom. Truly, there are so many more miles to go before we go to sleep. On Emancipation Day, let's endeavour to teach each other how to evaluate ourselves and our government or our political party objectively and to use our brain, as Garvey advised us to do more than 7 decades ago. On Emancipation Day, and it says 2013, we should evaluate why our people are not willing to emancipate themselves from that dependency syndrome that forces them to crawl to politicians for everything that they need. Aren't they aware that this disposition is a carryover from the days of slavery? Why are we not being encouraged to develop our country by our own blood, sweat and tears, instead of being perpetually dependent on handouts from Venezuela, the People's Republic of China or Morocco? Do we have a plan to be economically independent, say in the next 50 years? On Emancipation Day, we should recognise the magnitude of the sacrifices of our forefathers and national heroes who've paved the way to freedom from slavery to political independence. It is therefore our duty and responsibility to continue our slow but upward progress towards economic independence, otherwise we will forever remain international beggars. On Emancipation Day, we must encourage Dominicans to consider the Greek proverb that advises us that a society grows great when old men plant trees whose shade they know they shall never sit in. On Emancipation Day, we must also recognize that we need to take small and decisive steps to emancipate ourselves from the mental, spiritual and emotional shackles which allow us to tolerate domestic violence, child abuse and corruption in political office. And we need to resolve that we will not tolerate these aberrations, whether it's practiced by our beloved political or religious leaders. We need to find ways to emancipate ourselves from the thought processes and the residues of slavery that allow us to believe that foreign products and systems are always better than our own. On Emancipation Day, we need to discuss ways of getting out of the mindset that prevents us from making significant progress on issues such as the creation of the Caribbean single economy and the Caribbean Court of Justice. To paraphrase Garvey, Emancipation Day is an opportune time to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. While the driver may have taken the battery out of the Porsche, Mika'el Cujo of We the People Republic has put it in neutral and is trying to push it anyway. He's issued the 20th version of the draft Constitution of Jamaica, stating a new way of thinking, a mentally emancipated way of thinking is needed when dealing with this document. The document quotes the 1968 preface of the Laws of the Kings, saying, no modern legislation which doesn't have its roots in the customs of those whom it governs can have a strong foundation. The Laws of the Kings, or Fetha Nagast, is the foundation of Ethiopian law, and it stated that it was perhaps the first written law of sub-Saharan Africa. The 20th version and Cujo's accompanying YouTube video will actually be linked on my podcast page. As a reminder, if you're not registered to vote, September 30, 2026 is just around the corner, and it's the deadline to register for the November 30, 2026 voters list. Folks, you can find this podcast on YouTube, Buzzsprout, Spotify, Podcast Index, Deezer, Podcast Addict, Apple, iHeartRadio, and Amazon Music. If you want to reason about anything, or if you can't find any of the material I was talking about, you can email me on melanie.atasteofja@gmail.com. That's melanie.atasteofja@gmail.com. So until the next time, happy Emancipation Day. Thank you for supporting this podcast. And please subscribe, like, share, follow. And again, I thank you for taking the time to listen. One love. Yes, the word is love.